the echo of hurried footsteps was the first sign that my world was about to shift forever. Even now, I remember that moment with piercing clarity. The soft click of my headset, the faint hum of the switchboard, and the sudden, inexplicable chill that ran down my spine. At that time, I had no way of knowing that a single phone call would pull me into a web of deception that threatened to unravel the monarchy I had sworn to serve. My name is Margot Blackwood. Up until that fateful night, I was just another cog in the grand machinery of Eldoria's royal palace. As the night shift operator for the palace switchboard, my world was one of quiet nights, long hours, and the occasional late-night call. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a job I had fought hard to secure. A coveted role within the palace walls that had loomed over my childhood like a gilded dream. That night started like any other, with the sprawling corridors of the palace falling into their usual midnight stillness. The clock struck 12, the full moon casting ghostly shadows over the perfectly manicured gardens. I sipped my third cup of coffee, fingers poised over a tangle of blinking lights and tangled wires, feeling the quiet lull of routine, and then, at precisely 12:07 a.m., the red light on the board began to flash. It was the direct line to the king's private chambers, a line that had never lit up during my shift, not once in my entire tenure. My pulse quickened as I reached for the connection, my training kicking in despite the unnerving circumstances.
Your Majesty, I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. How may I assist you? There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of labored breathing. Then, a voice that was decidedly not the king's rasped through the line. Connect me to the Rose Garden suite, now. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the switch. The voice was unfamiliar, gruff, and filled with an urgency that set alarm bells ringing in my head. Protocol dictated that I verify the caller's identity before connecting any call from the royal suites, especially at this hour. But something in that voice, a note of desperation perhaps, made me pause. I'm sorry, sir, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. I'll need to verify your identity before— Damn it, girl, the voice hissed, cutting me off. This is a matter of life and death. Connect the call now, or I swear by all that's holy, you'll regret it. My training warred with my instincts. I knew I should alert security, follow protocol to the letter, but curiosity, that damned, insatiable curiosity that had always been my weakness, won out. With a trembling hand, I connected the call. What I heard in the next few minutes would haunt me for the rest of my life. It's done, the gruff voice said without preamble. The old man won't be a problem anymore. A gasp escaped my lips before I could stop it, and I clapped a hand over my mouth, praying they hadn't heard. My mind raced. The old man? Surely they couldn't mean— Excellent, a silky voice replied, one I recognized with a jolt as belonging to Lord Cavendish, the king's most trusted advisor. And the evidence? Taken care of. No one will ever know. Good. The transition of power will be smooth then. The crown prince will assume the throne, none the wiser to our intervention. My blood ran cold. Were they talking about what I thought they were? Had I just become an unwitting witness to regicide? Remember, Lord Cavendish continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, if word of this ever gets out, it won't just be your head on the chopping block. We'll make sure your entire family suffers. Understood, my lord. You'll never hear from me again. The line went dead, leaving me sitting in stunned silence, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. For a long moment, I sat frozen, unable to process what I had just heard. Then, with shaking hands, I reached for the record button, a feature installed for security purposes, one I had never had cause to use before. But if what I suspected was true, this recording could be the only evidence of a plot that struck at the very heart of the monarchy. As the gravity of the situation settled over me, a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I had stumbled onto something far bigger than myself, something dangerous and deadly. The smart thing to do would be to delete the recording, forget everything I'd heard, and go about my life as if nothing had happened. But I knew, deep in my bones, that I could never unhear those words. I could never unsuspect the treachery that had just unfolded. And I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that my life would never be the same. As I sat there, the weight of my newfound knowledge pressing down on me like a physical thing, a sound from the corridor outside made me jump. Footsteps, slow and measured, approaching the switchboard room. My heart leaped into my throat. Had they realized someone was listening? Were they coming for me already? I quickly saved the recording to a small, nondescript USB drive I kept for personal use, tucking it into my shoe just as the doorknob began to turn. As the door creaked open, I plastered what I hoped was a neutral expression on my face, praying that my fear wasn't as visible as it felt. "Evening, Margot," said the night guard, poking his head in. "Just doing my rounds." "Everything quiet tonight?" I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. He gave me a friendly nod and continued on his way, leaving me alone once more with the enormity of what I had discovered. As the night wore on, every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every distant sound a harbinger of doom. By the time my shift ended and the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, I had made my decision. I couldn't ignore what I had heard. I couldn't pretend that the world hadn't shifted on its axis. I had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Because what I found behind that door, or rather what I heard through that phone line, would haunt me forever. As I left the palace that morning, the USB drive burning a hole in my shoe, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The weight of the secret I now carried was almost unbearable, and I knew that my next move could mean the difference between life and death, not just for me, but for the entire kingdom. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The web of lies and deceit I had stumbled into was far more intricate and dangerous than I could have ever imagined. And as I stepped out into the deceptively peaceful morning, I couldn't help but wonder, if these hidden truths intrigued you, what dark secrets might be lurking in your own world, just waiting to be uncovered? The soft rustle of paper in the dead of night became the sound I would dread most. Each time I heard it, my heart would race, wondering if this was the moment my secret would be discovered. But let me not get ahead of myself. To understand how I found myself in this precarious position, we need to step back and look at the events that led me here. Growing up in the shadow of Eldoria's grand palace, I had always been fascinated by the world behind those gilded gates. My father, a groundskeeper for the royal gardens, would regale me with stories of the palace's splendor and the nobility's eccentricities. Those tales, whispered over dinner as if they were state secrets themselves, planted the seeds of my curiosity. "Remember, Margot," he'd say, his eyes twinkling with a mix of pride and caution, "the walls have ears in that place, and sometimes those ears belong to the most unexpected people." Little did I know how prophetic those words would become. As a child, I'd often accompany my father to work, hiding behind the meticulously trimmed hedges, watching the comings and goings of the royal family and their entourage. It was during one of these secret observations that I first laid eyes on Prince Edward, the man who would one day become our king. He was barely a teenager then. All gangly limbs and tousled hair, so different from the polished image he now presented to the world. I remember the way he laughed, carefree and genuine, as he chased his younger sister through the rose garden. It was a sound that would become increasingly rare as the years wore on, and the weight of his future responsibilities settled upon his shoulders. That memory floated to the surface now as I sat in my tiny apartment, the USB drive containing the damning conversation clutched tightly in my hand. How had that laughing boy become entangled in what seemed to be a plot of patricide? Or was he an unwitting pawn in a game much larger than any of us could imagine? The clock on my nightstand blinked, 3:47 a.m. Sleep had become an elusive luxury since that fateful night shift. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Lord Cavendish's silky voice. "The transition of power will be smooth then. The crown prince will assume the throne, none the wiser to our intervention." I shuddered, remembering the cold calculation in those words. Lord Cavendish had always struck me as ambitious, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. My mind wandered back to my first day at the palace, barely a year ago. I had been so proud, so excited to finally step into the world I had observed from afar for so long. The head of staff, a stern woman named Mrs. Holloway, had given me a tour of the communications department. "Remember, Miss Blackwood," she had said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Discretion is not just expected here, it is demanded. The conversations that pass through our switchboards are the lifeblood of the monarchy. Guard them well." I had nodded eagerly, thrilled to be entrusted with such responsibility. Now that same responsibility felt like a noose tightening around my neck. A sudden noise outside my window made me jump. Heart pounding, I crept to the curtains and peered out. The street below was empty, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the street lamps. But for a moment, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move in the alleyway across the street. Paranoia, I told myself. Just paranoia. But was it? The weight of the USB drive in my palm reminded me that my fears were far from unfounded. I had proof of a conspiracy at the highest levels of our government, a conspiracy that had likely resulted in the death of our king. I moved to my small desk, pulling out a weathered leather journal, a gift from my mother before she passed. I had always found solace in writing, in putting my thoughts to paper where they couldn't swirl endlessly in my mind. But now, even this simple act felt dangerous. What if someone broke in and found my writings? What if my suspicions were recorded and discovered? Still, I couldn't help myself. I needed to organize my thoughts, to try and make sense of the chaos that had become my life. I began to write, my pen scratching softly against the paper. The palace has always had its secrets. Every child in Eldoria grows up hearing whispers of hidden passages, of centuries-old scandals buried in the royal archives. But never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I would uncover a secret of this magnitude. Who can I trust, Mrs. Holloway, with her unwavering dedication to protocol? The night guard who so casually checked on me that fateful night. Was his appearance truly a coincidence? And what of Prince Edward? Is he a victim in this plot, or its mastermind? I paused, the weight of my questions hanging heavy in the air. The faces of those I had worked alongside for the past year flashed through my mind. How many of them were involved? How deep did this conspiracy run? A memory surfaced, unbidden. It was from a few months ago, a chance encounter in one of the palace's lesser-used corridors. I had been hurrying to my shift when I quite literally ran into Lord Cavendish. He had steadied me, his hand lingering perhaps a moment too long on my arm. "Careful, my dear," he had said, his voice smooth as silk. "It wouldn't do to have such a lovely young thing injure herself in these old halls. They hide many dangers, you know." At the time, I had blushed at the compliment, flustered by the attention from such a powerful man. Now the memory sent a chill down my spine. Had it been a warning? A threat? The soft chime of my phone startled me from my reverie. A text message at this hour? With trembling fingers, I unlocked the screen. Unknown number. "The rose garden holds more than just flowers. Midnight tomorrow. Come alone if you want answers." I stared at the message, my mind racing. The rose garden. The same place mentioned in the intercepted call. This couldn't be a coincidence. But who had sent the message? Was it a trap or a lifeline? And more importantly, did I have the courage to find out? As the first light of dawn began to creep through my curtains, I made my decision. I would go to the rose garden. I had to know the truth, no matter the cost. I closed my journal, hiding it in the false bottom of my desk drawer, another relic of a childhood spent imagining palace intrigues. As I did so, my eyes fell on an old photograph tucked into the corner of my mirror. It showed a much younger me, grinning gap-toothed beside my father in front of the palace gates. "Oh, Dad," I whispered, touching the image gently. "What would you do if you were in my shoes?" But I knew the answer. My father, for all his love of palace gossip, was a man of unwavering integrity. He would do what was right, no matter the personal cost. And so would I. As I prepared for another day at the palace, my mind swirling with questions and fears, I couldn't help but wonder, if you found yourself in my position, caught between duty and truth, what would you do? Would you dare to uncover secrets that could shatter everything you've ever known? If you're curious where this mystery leads, if you're intrigued by the darkness lurking behind the palace's gleaming facade, then stay with me. Because this is only the beginning, and the truth, I fear, is far more terrifying than anything we could imagine. The following night, as the clock ticked closer to midnight, I found myself standing at the edge of the palace grounds, my heart pounding in my chest. The rose garden loomed before me, a labyrinth of shadowy hedges and fragrant blooms. In the pale moonlight, it looked both enchanting and foreboding. Would you have dared to enter, knowing it could shatter everything? I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves. The weight of the USB drive in my pocket was a constant reminder of why I was here. With one last glance over my shoulder, I slipped into the garden. The scent of roses was almost overpowering, their perfume hanging heavy in the night air. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud on the gravel path, each crunch making me wince. I moved deeper into the garden, my eyes straining in the darkness, every shadow seeming to conceal a potential threat. As I reached the center of the garden, where a grand fountain stood silent in the moonlight, a voice spoke from the shadows. "I wasn't sure you'd come, Miss Blackwood." I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. From behind a large topiary stepped a figure I recognized immediately, Lady Amelia, the king's younger sister. "Your Highness," I gasped, instinctively dropping into a curtsy. I don't understand." Lady Amelia raised a hand, silencing me. "Please, there's no time for formalities. We have much to discuss and little time to do it." She motioned for me to follow her, leading me to a secluded bench partially hidden by a weeping willow. As we sat, I couldn't help but notice how different she looked from her public appearances. Gone was the polished royal, replaced by a woman who seemed haunted. "You intercepted a call the night my brother died," she said without preamble. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to find my voice. Lady Amelia's eyes, so like the late king's, bored into mine. "Tell me everything you heard. Every word, every nuance. It's crucial." And so, in that moonlit garden, with roses nodding their heavy heads around us, I recounted the conversation that had turned my world upside down. Lady Amelia listened intently, her face a mask of controlled emotion. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then, to my utter shock, she reached out and grasped my hands in hers. "Margot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what I'm about to tell you will put your life in grave danger, but I have no choice. You're the key to unraveling this conspiracy." She took a deep breath, and in that moment, I saw the weight of the crown that she too had been born to bear. My brother's death was no accident, as I'm sure you've guessed. But it goes deeper than you could possibly imagine. This isn't just about the throne. It's about an ancient power, one that has protected Eldoria for centuries. I leaned in, captivated despite my fear. "What kind of power?" Lady Amelia glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers before continuing. "Have you ever wondered why Eldoria has remained peaceful and prosperous for so long, while nations around us have fallen into chaos?" I nodded. It was something I'd often pondered, especially given our small nation's strategic importance. "It's because of the Celeste Stone," she said. "A relic passed down through our family for generations. It's said to have the power to influence minds, to soothe conflicts and inspire cooperation. In the right hands, it's a tool for peace. In the wrong hands, it could be a weapon," I finished, the implications dawning on me. Lady Amelia nodded grimly. "Exactly. And now, it's missing. Stolen the night my brother died." The pieces began to fall into place. "Lord Cavendish," I breathed. "He's after the stone." "We believe so," Lady Amelia confirmed. "But we can't prove it. That's where you come in. Your recording could be the evidence we need to expose the plot." I felt a chill run down my spine. "But why me? Surely there are others more qualified, more powerful?" Lady Amelia's grip on my hands tightened. "Because you're unexpected. No one would suspect a switchboard operator to be at the center of this. And because of your father. I blinked in surprise. My father? What does he have to do with this? A sad smile crossed Lady Amelia's face. Your father wasn't just a groundskeeper, Margot. He was one of our most trusted agents. He died protecting the secret of the Celeste Stone. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My father, the man who had raised me on stories of palace intrigue, had been living those stories himself. I don't know what to say, I stammered. Say you'll help us, Lady Amelia urged. Help us find the stone and bring Lord Cavendish to justice. For your father, for my brother, for Eldoria. As I opened my mouth to respond, a twig snapped somewhere in the garden. Lady Amelia and I both froze. We're not alone, she whispered, rising to her feet. Margot, you must go. Now. Tell no one of this conversation. She pressed a small object into my hand, a ring bearing the royal crest. If you need me, use this. 1 turn to the left will signal danger. 2 turns will request a meeting. I clutched the ring, nodding my understanding. As I turned to leave, Lady Amelia caught my arm. Remember, trust no one. Not even those closest to you. The walls have ears, and in this game, anyone could be a player. With that ominous warning ringing in my ears, I slipped out of the garden and into the night. My mind was reeling with everything I had learned. My father, a secret agent. The Celeste Stone, a mythical object of immense power. And me, somehow at the center of it all. As I made my way back to my apartment, every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. The weight of the responsibility I now carried was almost overwhelming. How could I, a simple switchboard operator, hope to uncover a conspiracy of this magnitude? But then I thought of my father, of the sacrifices he had made. I thought of the late king, of Lady Amelia's haunted eyes. I thought of Eldoria, the nation I loved, teetering on the brink of chaos. I knew then that I had no choice. I was in this, for better or worse. As I reached my apartment building, a figure emerged from the shadows across the street. My heart leaped into my throat as I recognized the silhouette, Lord Cavendish. Good evening, Miss Blackwood, he called, his voice as smooth as ever. Fancy meeting you here at this late hour. I froze, my hand instinctively moving to my pocket where the USB drive lay hidden. Lord Cavendish's eyes followed the movement, a predatory smile playing at his lips. I do hope you're being careful, he continued, taking a step closer. These streets can be so dangerous at night. One never knows what, or who, might be lurking in the shadows. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I opened my mouth to respond, to say something, anything that might diffuse the tension. But before I could utter a word, a hand clamped over my mouth from behind. I tried to scream, to struggle, but a sweet-smelling cloth was pressed against my face. As the world began to fade to black, the last thing I saw was Lord Cavendish's triumphant smile. The realization came too late. I wasn't alone. And now, I was in more danger than I could have ever imagined. As consciousness slipped away, one thought echoed in my mind. If you're captivated by these twists and turns, brace yourself. Because the game is only just beginning, and the stakes are higher than any of us could have dreamed. The flicker of torchlight seemed to close in, each step echoing like a drumbeat of dread. As consciousness slowly returned, I found myself in a dimly lit room, the musty smell of age and neglect filling my nostrils. My head throbbed, and my vision swam as I tried to make sense of my surroundings. I was seated in a hard-backed chair, my wrists bound behind me. The room appeared to be some sort of old cellar or underground chamber, with rough stone walls glistening with moisture. A single torch cast flickering shadows across the room, creating an eerie dance of light and darkness. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I wasn't alone. A figure stood in the shadows just beyond the reach of the torchlight. My heart raced as I recognized the silhouette, Lord Cavendish. Ah, Miss Blackwood, his silky voice cut through the silence. So good of you to join us. I trust you slept well? I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Where am I? What do you want from me? Lord Cavendish stepped into the light, his usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. There was a wild look in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. What do I want? He mused, circling my chair like a predator stalking its prey. Information, my dear. You see, you've become quite the inconvenience, a loose end that needs tying up. He leaned in close, his breath hot on my ear. Tell me, what exactly did you overhear that night? And more importantly, who have you told? I clenched my jaw, refusing to answer. Lord Cavendish chuckled, a sound devoid of any real mirth. Stubborn, aren't we? Just like your father, he too thought he could stand against forces beyond his comprehension. At the mention of my father, anger flared within me, momentarily overriding my fear. You knew my father? Oh yes, Cavendish replied, a cruel smile playing on his lips. We were acquainted. Such a shame about his accident, don't you think? The implication hit me like a physical blow. My father's death, the fall from the palace roof that had always seemed so suspicious. It hadn't been an accident at all. You killed him, I whispered, horror and rage warring within me. Lord Cavendish shrugged as if we were discussing something as trivial as the weather. He was in the way, just as you are now. But you have a chance he didn't. A chance to save yourself. All you have to do is tell me everything you know about the Celeste Stone. My mind raced. How much did he know? How much should I reveal? I decided to play dumb, hoping to buy some time. The Celeste Stone? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a switchboard operator. His hand shot out, gripping my chin painfully. Don't lie to me, girl. I know you met with Lady Amelia. I know she told you about the stone. What I don't know is where she's hidden it. I glared at him defiantly, even as fear coursed through my veins. Even if I knew, I would never tell you. Lord Cavendish's eyes hardened. Everyone breaks eventually, Miss Blackwood. It's only a matter of time and persuasion. As if on cue, the door to the cellar creaked open. Two men entered, their faces obscured by shadows. One carried a briefcase that made my blood run cold. Perhaps some time alone with my associates will loosen your tongue, Cavendish said, moving towards the door. I do hope, for your sake, that you decide to cooperate sooner rather than later. As he left, the two men approached. The one with the briefcase set it on a nearby table and opened it, revealing an array of instruments that I didn't want to contemplate too closely. Now then, the other man said, cracking his knuckles ominously. Let's have a little chat, shall we? What followed were hours of interrogation, a blurring nightmare of questions, threats, and pain. They wanted to know about the Celeste Stone, about Lady Amelia's plans, about who else might be involved in opposing them. I clung desperately to my resolve, revealing nothing of importance. Throughout it all, one thought kept me going: the memory of my father. If he had died protecting this secret, I would not dishonor his sacrifice by breaking now. As exhaustion began to overtake me, my mind drifted. I thought of the palace, of the life I had led that now seemed so distant. I thought of Prince Edward, wondering if he truly was oblivious to the plot surrounding him, or if he too was involved in this web of deceit. Just as I felt my resolve beginning to crumble, a commotion outside the door caught everyone's attention. There were shouts, the sound of running feet, then silence. The door burst open and a figure in black burst in. In a flurry of movement too fast for my weary eyes to follow, my interrogators were subdued. As the newcomer turned to me, I gasped in recognition. It was James, the night guard from the palace, the one who had checked on me the night I intercepted the fateful call. We need to move now, he said urgently, cutting my bonds. Can you walk? I nodded weakly, stumbling to my feet. James supported me as we made our way out of the cellar and through what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. The cool night air hit me like a shock as we emerged outside. How did you find me? I managed to ask as he guided me to a waiting car. James glanced around warily before answering. Lady Amelia suspected you might be in danger. She had me keeping an eye on you. When you disappeared, well, let's just say we have our ways of tracking Cavendish's movements. As we sped through the darkened streets of the city, my mind whirled with questions. Who exactly was James? How deep did this conspiracy go? And what would happen now? Where are we going? I asked, fighting to stay conscious. Somewhere safe, James replied cryptically. Somewhere we can regroup and plan our next move. As the city lights blurred past the window, I felt a mix of relief and trepidation. I had escaped Cavendish's clutches, but I knew this was far from over. The game had changed, the stakes raised even higher. We turned down a narrow alley, the car coming to a stop before an unmarked door. As James helped me out of the car, a shadow shifted behind me, and a voice whispered my name. I froze, my heart pounding. Had we been followed? Was this another trap? But as I turned, I saw a face I never expected to see again, one that sent a jolt of shock through my entire being. Dad? I whispered, disbelief and hope warring within me. The man stepped forward, his familiar features lined with worry and relief. Hello, Margot. It's time you learned the truth. All of it. As James ushered us inside, I realized that this was only the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous game. And as the door closed behind us, sealing us in this new world of secrets and shadows, I couldn't help but wonder, for those following this suspenseful unraveling, what shocking revelations await in the depths of this conspiracy? How far are you willing to go to uncover the truth? The room we entered was a stark contrast to the dank cellar I had been held in. It was a command center of sorts, with walls covered in maps, photographs, and strings connecting various pieces of information. Screens flickered with data streams and surveillance footage. In the center stood a large table, currently occupied by Lady Amelia and several others I didn't recognize. But my attention was fixed solely on the man beside me, my father, alive and well. How is this possible? I stammered, my mind reeling. We buried you. I mourned you. My father's eyes, so familiar and yet somehow changed, filled with regret. I'm so sorry, Margot. Faking my death was the only way to protect you and continue my work. Lady Amelia stepped forward, her regal bearing somewhat softened by the concern in her eyes. Perhaps we should all sit down. There's much to discuss, and I'm sure Margot needs rest after her ordeal. As we settled around the table, my father beside me, I felt a whirlwind of emotions: relief, anger, confusion, and an overwhelming need for answers. Start from the beginning, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to know everything. Lady Amelia nodded, her gaze sweeping the room before settling on me. The Celeste Stone, as I told you, has been the source of Eldoria's prosperity for centuries, but its power comes with a price. Every generation, it requires a sacrifice. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of sacrifice? A life, my father said softly. A willing offering from the royal family to bind the stone's power and maintain the balance. The implications of this hit me like a physical blow. The king, I whispered. He was the sacrifice? Lady Amelia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. My brother knew his duty. He was prepared to give his life for Eldoria. But Lord Cavendish and his conspirators had other plans. They seek to use the stone's power for their own gain, James added, speaking up for the first time since we'd entered. To control not just Eldoria, but to expand their influence beyond our borders. My mind was reeling with the enormity of what I was hearing. But why me? Why am I involved in all of this? My father reached out, taking my hand in his. Because of me, partly. As one of the stone's guardians, I've been working to protect it and the royal family for years. When Cavendish's plot began to unfold, I knew I had to go deeper undercover. And partly because of your own abilities, Lady Amelia interjected. The Celeste Stone responds to certain bloodlines. Your father's family has been connected to it for generations. We believe you may be key to unlocking its full potential, for good or ill. I sat back, overwhelmed. What do you do when you learn the crown you've sworn to protect is the true source of danger? I mused aloud, more to myself than to the others. You fight, my father said firmly. You stand for what's right, no matter the cost. Lady Amelia leaned forward, her eyes intense. Margot, I know this is a lot to take in, but we need your help. The stone is hidden, but not safe. Cavendish is closing in, and if he gets his hands on it, the consequences would be catastrophic, James finished. I looked around the room, at these people who had dedicated their lives to protecting a secret I'd only just learned existed. I thought of Lord Cavendish, of the cruelty in his eyes and the lengths he was willing to go to for power. What do you need me to do? I asked, my decision made. The relief on their faces was palpable. Lady Amelia smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. We need to move the stone, and for that, we need you to act as a conduit. A conduit? My father nodded. The stone's power can be channeled through you. It will allow us to transport it safely, without detection. But, Lady Amelia added, her voice grave, it comes with risks. The power of the stone is immense. Channeling it could be dangerous. I swallowed hard, understanding the unspoken implication. This could kill me. But then I thought of Eldoria, of the peace and prosperity we'd known, of the people who would suffer if Cavendish succeeded. I'll do it, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. As the others began to discuss plans and strategies, I found myself drifting, the events of the past few days catching up with me. My father must have noticed, because he gently suggested I get some rest.